The cough medicine contains the same chemicals discovered by doctors in India. Industrial chemicals, diethylene glycol and ethylene glycol, are antifreeze agents used widely as lubricant, car brake fluid, and in plastic production. Only the tiniest trace of these are permitted in medicine. Any more would make the medicine poisonous. Children under the age of 5 are the most vulnerable.
What happens in infants and young children, they will not complain. There may be just crying episodes. They will have fever, they have cough, they're not going to complain about abdominal pain, headache.
What's worse, most often, the children are accidentally poisoned by their own unsuspecting parents.
Parents are sometimes very concerned about young children and would like to give repeated medications to ensure that the cough is resolved as early as possible. They're likely to give a higher dose or a repeated dose, and in case it is contaminated, it's likely to give more chances of renal failure.
Like all medicines, cough syrups have an active pharmaceutical ingredient, the substance that actually treats a specific condition, and excipients, which are inactive substances that give color, form, and taste to the medicine. Cough syrups use glycerol or propylene glycol as a base to thicken and sweeten the medicine. They are harmless. Industrial solvents, like diethylene glycol, are not.
It is more sweet than the usual glycerol which is used for making these syrups. So this was more palatable.
Diethylene glycol has a diabolic past. In 1937, it killed over 100 people in the United States when it was used in liquid antibiotic. A third of them were children. Since then, cases have been found in Bangladesh, China, India, Nigeria, and Panama. In most cases, the toxin was found in pediatric cough syrups. In India, in the eye of the storm, are the two manufacturing companies, Maiden Pharmaceuticals, which supplied the medicines to Gambia, and Marion Biotech, which exported to Uzbekistan. As the controversy rages, Maiden Pharmaceuticals puts out a public statement in its defense. But the incident brings into focus the mammoth problem of poor quality medicines across the world. The WHO reckons that 10.5% of medicines worldwide may be falsified or substandard.
A falsified medicine is essentially a fake, one that purports to be something that it is not. A substandard medicine, on the other hand, may be actually manufactured by a licensed pharmaceutical company, but may not meet the standards that are required for it to be effective.
Poor quality medicine has given rise to antimicrobial resistance and drug-resistant infections by prolonging illnesses and their treatment.
This is a global problem, and the reason for that is quite simple, because the supply chain of pharmaceuticals is a global one. You may have active ingredients coming in from one country, it may be formulated in another country and then imported into your own country for distribution and consumption. So as a regulator, it's a tremendous challenge to make sure that the supply chain is secured and that you are protecting the health and safety of the patients who are consuming those drugs in your country.
India has 3,000 companies with over 10,000 factories. Some of the biggest names in the pharmaceutical world are based there, along with smaller companies. Implementing stringent regulations is a challenge in any country. But India's complex drug control system makes it more complicated.
In India, we have two different lists. The government of India has a central list, which the government of India has complete control over, and there is a concurrent list where states and centre share responsibility among both in the federal structure of the union.
The centre approves new medicines, clinical trials, and sets standards for drugs. The 28 states and 8 union territories issue licenses and monitor the manufacture, sale, and distribution of drugs in their territory. They have their own rules and regulations. Dinesh Thakur is the co-author of The Truth Pill, an investigative book on drug regulation laws in India. In October 2022, when the WHO put out a product alert against the toxic cough syrups, Thakur began researching deeper for information on Maiden Pharmaceuticals.
What we were able to find out was this company had a history of manufacturing bad quality medicine, even in India, even before the incident in the Gambia had happened. And that's what we made public.
It is also among nearly 40 Indian pharmaceutical companies blacklisted by Vietnam for exporting substandard products.
Now the question is, how is it a company that has a track record of making bad quality medicine, blacklisted by states in India, how is it possible for them to be able to continue to make and ship medicine? The answer is very simple. There is no consolidated database of information within India where a buyer can go in and look at it and say, how good is this company? Has it been cited for making bad quality medicines in the past? We just don't have a consolidated database of that.
Despite past allegations, Maiden Pharmaceuticals continues its medicine production until the cough syrup incident, when operations temporarily halt. The company denies any wrongdoing, and the tests at the government laboratory find no toxins in the control samples that the authorities had collected from them. This result contradicted WHO findings. Undercover Asia reaches out to the WHO for a clarification. For every batch of medicine marketed, the manufacturer is required to retain a certain number of control samples from the same batch for future investigation. It represents the exact ingredients which have gone into the final product in that batch. But there is a fundamental risk. It relies on the integrity of the pharma company.
Control samples, basically, they are the property of the manufacturer. These samples are not sealed by the drug authority. These samples are not in such a condition that nobody can tamper it, nobody can open. These are as good as the finished goods. Manufacturer has all the liberty to open the sample portion, change the sample portion, to alter the sample portion. Whatever he wants, he can do. 100% faith or our report on control sample is not okay.
Over the past few decades, India has become a formidable giant in medicine making. But in 2022, deaths linked to contaminated cough syrups threaten to mar the reputation of its $42 billion pharma industry. Under global scrutiny after the cough syrups controversies, Indian regulatory authorities conduct a massive crackdown on 76 firms all around India in March 2023. 18 companies lose their licenses. It exposes the weaknesses in the system.
Welcome to News at 8. We take a look at
The state drug control departments are on the front lines of quality control. And the drug inspectors are the foot soldiers of regulations, so much depends on them. But according to former state drug controller of Haryana, Dr. G.L. Singhal, there aren't enough boots on the ground.
The central law says that every unit, maybe sale or manufacturing, has to be inspected at least once in a year. But practically, it is not happening so. In Haryana, we have around 25,000 chemist shops. Only 10 inspectors, not even one in each district. We have around 500 manufacturing units in the state of Haryana. Again, 10 inspectors. And chemist shop, you can go and inspect within 3, 4 or 6 hours. But manufacturing inspection is not so easy and so short. Sometimes it takes 2 days also.
The infrequent checking of manufacturing units in some states means that for most part, companies have to self-regulate the quality of their medicines.
Once you enter into pharma, it should be ingrained in your own self why I have to maintain the quality, because it is for human consumption.
For export, the guidelines are clearly marked out.
Whatever is the expiry of that particular product, to that extent, you have to retain the control sample as well as the raw material and excipient issue records, then batch manufacturing records, then test records, all those things you have to retain.
To ensure the safety of medicines, all companies across the world are mandated to adhere to stringent guidelines known as Good Manufacturing Practice or GMP.
GMP is a part of quality assurance. It ensures that each unit of the product, when I say each unit, each capsule or each tablet or each ampule will perform its function and either cure or reduce the infection that a person has. If you look at Schedule M or if you look at US FDA guidelines, the semantics may be different, but the ultimate objective is the product safe to the customer? Let there be no doubt that the Indian regulations are anyway inferior to any other regulation of the world. No, it is not so.
Contaminants like diethylene glycol and ethylene glycol can enter the process of pharmaceutical manufacturing as raw materials, which is why GMP mandates rigorous testing of raw materials.
We are obligated to test all the raw materials which we use in our formulations. Even if they are tested by the manufacturer, we still have to test it ourselves and certify that it is fit enough to be used in our formulations. And where the tests are critical, like propylene glycol.
There are typically two kinds of propylene glycol available: industrial grade, used in engine coolants, liquid cleaners, latex paints, and pharmaceutical grade, used as a solvent to make medicines.
The technical grade of propylene glycol has a much higher content of ethylene glycol and diethylene glycol compared to the pharmaceutical grade of propylene glycol. People who use in industries are not really aware of implication of diethylene glycol and ethylene glycol in the human body. And many manufacturers might use industrial grade because it definitely comes cheaper.
Industrial grade propylene glycol is half the cost of pharmaceutical grade propylene glycol, as is the cost of diethylene glycol. Toxins can get into raw materials by accident, mislabeling, or human error, but they can also get in by design. Unscrupulous chemical suppliers could deliberately substitute part or entire barrels of pharmaceutical grade with cheaper solvents. It is crucial to test the raw materials as they are received. As expients begin to get mixed into the formulations, the impurities become more difficult to detect later in the manufacturing process.
Now, let us say this is a product, it's a liquid product which contains active ingredient and several excipients. Let's say maybe something like 14 to 15 excipients are likely to be present. What is important? The active pharmaceutical ingredient which is going to act on the human body. There are several other excipients. They will have impurities on their own. Those impurities have to be tested at the raw material screening itself.
But testing is costly, and some smaller manufacturers flout regulations to cut costs.
The testing of propylene glycol for the presence of impurity diethylene glycol requires a very, very sophisticated instrument, GLC. That is around 20-25 lakh cost instrument only. And majority of the Haryana manufacturers do not have this instrument, even if they are manufacturing and using propylene glycol. And the test from the market is very costly if you go to a genuine testing laboratory. Otherwise, there are a number of laboratories which give a certificate that we have tested is okay. And our inspectors goes there, they see report is there, okay.
There is also no requirement for manufacturers to test finished medicines for the presence of toxic chemicals, as regulatory bodies assume that the raw materials have been cleared. The flaws in the testing process are a global problem.
It is not required to be tested by any regulation across the world.
The Indonesian Food and Drug authorities, too, face the daunting task of explaining the presence of these toxins to the parents who have lost their children. They put out a press statement.
Indonesian police investigation found.
In January 2023, the Food and Drug Monitoring Agency, BPOM, tracks the trail of the poisoned medicines.
The Indonesian police find the culprit for the toxic cough syrups.
In 2021, post-pandemic disruptions caused the price of propylene glycol to spike, and there's a worldwide shortage of the solvent. A local trader, CV Samudera, forges the labels of industrial propylene glycol, marking them as pharmaceutical-grade solvent manufactured by Dow Chemicals, Thailand. It then distributes the solvent to manufacturing firms. Dubious raw materials, lack of tests, companies forging labels, the supply chain for medicines is complex. To rely only on a mere guarantee certificate from the chemical supplier is dangerous. The negligence by the manufacturers and the government for preventing the leak of the toxins into medicines enrages parents. They file a lawsuit against the government.
Ya, saya emang mau menuntut pemerintah karena kan saya minum obat itu kan udah terbukti ada zat berbahayanya, supaya tidak ada kejadian lagi yang seperti yang anak saya alami gitu ke depannya. Dan pengawasan obat BPOM-nya tuh lebih diperketat lagi, lebih diperbaiki lagi gitu.
The lawsuit seeks compensation of $195,000 for every child killed and about $130,000 for every child injured.
Sebenarnya untuk kasus keracunan obat sirup ini baru pertama kali terjadi ya. Karena penggunaan bahan berbahaya beracun ethylene glycol dan diethylene glycol. Jadi pemerintah pada tahun 2022 ketika terjadi bulan Januari dan terus terjadi sampai bulan November, 10 bulan itu pemerintah bingung dan tidak tahu apa yang terjadi. Ya seharusnya kebingungan itu tidak perlu terjadi ya. Harusnya di negara-negara lain keracunan bahan obat karena penggunaan ethylene glycol dan diethylene glycol itu sudah terjadi bertahun-tahun sebelumnya. Jadi harusnya pemerintah itu dari awal itu tahu bahwa potensi terjadi penggunaan bahan berbahaya dan beracun ethylene glycol dan diethylene glycol dalam produksi obat sirup itu potensinya besar sekali terjadi gitu di Indonesia.
The case continues and the families hope for justice. Close on the tail of the tainted cough syrups, a brand of eye drops exported from India is held responsible for a superbug outbreak in the United States.
Indian pharma company recalls eye drops, the controversial eye drops that were the reason, according to United States, for 1 death and 55 infections.
Issues with a lack of independent testing.
David Light, a biotech entrepreneur, is the founder of an online pharmacy and independent laboratory called ValleySure in the United States. It has discovered several regulatory mishaps.
So there's many points in the supply chain that these kinds of contamination issues and real safety concerns can happen. Valsartan or the angiotensin receptor blocker drugs like valsartan, losartan, irbesartan were some of the first drugs in 2018 to be identified with what are called nitrosamine carcinogens. That is a probable human carcinogen that is extremely potent, is actually used to induce cancer in rats in clinical trials. That's really the primary use of NDMA.
While researching, they find carcinogens in several medicines.
We found NDMA in Zantac and all generic forms of ranitidine, which is an antacid medication. We found it in a significant percentage of metformin drug products. So metformin is the #1 diabetes medication in the United States. Many of these findings have caused recalls not just in the United States, but all over the world.
India has the maximum number of US FDA-approved manufacturing units outside the US. But regulating industries outside the country isn't easy.
The FDA has many challenges in overseeing the quality of the manufacturing of medicines, which is global. There's obviously language barriers. They have to get interpreters. They have to even staff employees overseas, which they've had a lot of difficulty doing over the years.
A 2019 Bloomberg article mentioned that the FDA is able to check only 1% of drugs for impurities before they're imported.
Issue, however, is that it's being treated as a commodity product, just like oil. And even oil is actually tested independently at ports when it comes into the United States. However, this is not being done with medicines. The only consistent testing of products is being done at the manufacturer, largely in India and China, and then self-reported to regulatory agencies.
In May 2023, the US FDA inspection at the Global Pharma Manufacturing Unit in Chennai finds several concerns, including missing safeguards and procedures. But the state authorities in India finds no issues with the control samples collected from the manufacturing unit.
The problem in the United States is that for the last 10 years, the US government and the US FDA had walked a very fine line between penalizing Indian manufacturers who supply a large amount of medicines punitively, meaning that holding them accountable criminally, because they're afraid of the fact that there are going to be drug shortages in this country.
The global circulation of poor quality drugs is made worse with the easy availability of medicines on the internet.
There is one of the major threat all around the world, that is the self-medication. In all over the globe, there is a very common problem also that is known as the cyberchondria. What people they generally do, because when they are feeling unwell, they start searching on the search engine that what problem they are facing, what is the best treatment of that problem. And then again, they start finding those products which are used for the treatment on online pharmacies. If e-pharmacies, they are delivering you the product without prescription, that means there is a much more risk with the health of the person.
While it takes lab tests to determine whether or not a drug is substandard, consumers need to watch out for some telltale signs.
Right, just like in this case, it is cracking on the tablets. So that there is a cracking on the tablet means there is some binder is missing. So such kind of product, if there is a cracking, it indicates that it will definitely influence or impact the dissolution profile of the tablet. The second is if there is a capsule, for example, this is a capsule. This is soft gelatin capsules. Sometimes it happens that due to some circumstances, there is a leakage in the blistering over here, right? So such kind of product should not be taken. Another is that before you are buying the product, you have to check the expiry date, because that is very, very important. Because when the product is expired, that means the product gets 10% degraded. It is known as the shelf life.
As the world wakes up to the devastation that adulterated medicines have wreaked, governments have begun to make regulatory changes, including India.
There is a regulation that is coming up and that is going to be implemented effective August 1st of this year, requiring QR codes on the top 300 brands in India that can be scanned by any consumer to get information about the validity, the genuineness of the product, as well as certain other attributes about the product. And as a consumer, you must pull out your mobile phone, check it, scan the code. It is the easiest thing, and you'll get information yourself, which will empower you and give you that assurance that what you're taking is safe.
But with a lack of a solid global regulatory framework, the international supply chain remains vulnerable to poor quality drugs.
It's really industry that needs to lead with pushing for independent testing, being part of purchasing decisions and contracts, to more proactively evaluate something other than just price.